Before we begin, if you enjoy slow burn Western stories where every secret has teeth, subscribe and like this video. You'll want to stay for what's coming. The deal was never written down. No paper, no witnesses, just a handshake beneath a dying mesquite tree where the wind carried dust instead of mercy. Silence, in exchange for land. That was the price. And for 7 years, it held. Elias Granger stood alone at the edge of his ranch, boots half buried in cracked earth, watching the sun bleed out behind the hills. The land stretched wide and empty, his land by law and by blood. 3,000 acres taken after the border wars ended, when maps were redrawn by men with rifles instead of pens. He told himself the past was buried. That was the lie he lived on. The fences were strong, the cattle were fat, the neighboring claims had gone quiet. Peace at last. Or so it looked. The first sign something was wrong wasn't a gunshot, it was the silence. No birds, no cicadas, no wind. Just a stillness so heavy it pressed against his ears like cotton. Elias rested his hand on the worn wood of the fence post. The scar along his knuckles, crooked and pale, ached the way it always did when old things stirred. He'd earned it during the territorial purge, back when men settled arguments with fire. Back when she disappeared. He hadn't spoken her name in years. Didn't need to. The land remembered. A horse snorted behind him. Elias turned, slow. A lone rider waited near the southern trail, just beyond the boundary marker. Slim frame, straight posture, no weapon visible, but that meant nothing out here. The sun sat low enough to hide her face in shadow. But he didn't need to see it to know. His chest tightened. She hadn't aged the way he expected. Or maybe guilt just warps memory. She dismounted without asking permission. That alone broke the rules. Her boots hit the dirt softly. No rush, no fear. She walked like someone who knew she wouldn't be stopped. Elias stayed where he was. "You're standing on private land," he said. Her voice came back calm, measured. "So were you, 7 years ago." The wind returned, sudden and sharp, rattling the wire fence between them. Elias swallowed. That voice had lived in his head a long time. Softer now, older, but still steady. Still dangerous. "You shouldn't be here," he said. She stopped 3 paces away. "I came because you broke the deal." There it was. Not shouted. Not accused. Stated. Like a fact that had been waiting. Elias felt the ground tilt under his boots. "I haven't said a word," he replied. "Not to anyone." She tilted her head, studied him, the way a card player studies a table before deciding who bleeds. "You didn't have to," she said. "You moved the southern fence." His jaw tightened. A small thing, a practical thing. Land disputes required adjustments, everyone knew that. That land was unclaimed, survey lines changed. Elias smiled then, but there was no warmth in it. "Survey lines don't move themselves," she said. "People move them. People who think the past stays quiet if you keep feeding it dirt." For a moment, neither spoke. This was the part where usually guns came out. They didn't. That worried him more. Elias exhaled slowly. "You were paid," he said. "You left. You stayed gone. That was the agreement." Her eyes flicked to the ranch house in the distance. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney. Domestic, ordinary, safe. "You bought my silence," she said, "not my absence." The words settled deep. Too deep. Elias felt something cold unwrap inside his chest, not fear yet, but the memory of it. The kind that crawls instead of strikes. "What do you want?" he asked. She looked back at him, finally, fully. Her face carried the marks of time and something harsher. A thin scar traced her jawline, disappearing beneath her collar. Her eyes, though, those hadn't changed. They were clear, unforgiving. "I want you to remember," she said, "before the land does it for you." That was the moment Elias realized the deal hadn't protected him. It had only delayed the reckoning. She turned to leave. Just like that. No threats, no demands. That was the worst part. As she mounted her horse, she added, almost casually, "By the way, your northern neighbor's flying a new flag, claims the riverbend is his now." Elias stiffened. "That land's protected." She glanced back over her shoulder. "Nothing out here is," she said. "Not anymore." The rider disappeared into the dust. The ranch felt smaller. Elias stood there long after she was gone, staring at the fence line he'd shifted by 10 quiet yards. 10 yards that cost lives once. 10 yards soaked so deep into the soil that no rain ever washed it clean. He told himself it was nothing. A warning. A ghost. A bluff. That night, he slept with his rifle closer than usual. And still didn't hear the footsteps outside his window. Elias didn't sleep. The night pressed against the ranch like a held breath. Every creak of wood sounded intentional, every shadow felt placed. Just before dawn, he rose. The fence, that's where he went first. The southern line was untouched, but the northern markers, the old stone cairns by the river bend, were gone. Removed clean, not dragged, not broken, lifted. That meant men, organized ones. Territory wasn't being tested anymore, it was being claimed. By mid-morning, riders appeared on the ridge, 5 of them, too many for coincidence, too calm for bluffing. They didn't cross onto his land, they didn't have to. Their presence alone said enough. One rider broke formation and rode closer, stopping just shy of the boundary. A white cloth tied to his rifle. "Parley." "You Elias Granger?" the man called. Elias stepped forward. "Depends who's asking." The rider smirked. "Name's Holt. We're settling north now, Riverbend included." "That land's protected by old accords," Elias replied. Holt laughed. "Accords die when the men who remember them do. Then quieter, or the ones who survived decide to speak." Elias felt it then. Her words from yesterday tightening around his throat. "You bought my silence." Someone else had bought it too, or worse, she'd stopped selling. That night, Elias rode out alone. He didn't go north, he went east, toward the abandoned settlement everyone pretended didn't exist anymore. The place burned during the purge, the place where the deal had been made, the place where she had last stood beside him, alive. Inside the ruins, he found something new nailed to a charred post, a symbol. Not Holt's, not his, older, one he hadn't seen since the war. Elias stared at it, pulse hammering, finally understanding the truth he'd spent years outrunning. This wasn't about land. It never was. It was about what he helped bury beneath it. The symbol wouldn't leave his head. Elias rode back before sunrise, dust biting his eyes, chest tight with something close to regret, but sharper. He knew that mark. Everyone who lived through the purge did. It wasn't a gang sign. It was a promise. By noon, word spread fast. 2 ranches east had burned overnight. Not looted, not raided, burned clean. Livestock left alive, wells untouched. A message, not a theft. Territory wars followed rules. This broke them. Elias met Holt again by the river bend. This time, Holt didn't smile. "You stirred something old, Granger. Men are nervous." Elias didn't blink. "Then they should have stayed buried." Holt leaned closer. "That woman, she didn't just disappear, Granger. She was left. And people remember who stood where when the fire started." That night, Elias finally said her name out loud. Marrow. The sound of it felt wrong in his mouth, like a confession overheard by the walls. He remembered her standing between two sides back then, calm while men screamed. Remembered how she looked at him when he chose land over people. He remembered the deal: silence for survival. A knock came at the door. 3 slow taps, not hard enough to threaten, not soft enough to ignore. Elias opened it. She stood there, not armed, not afraid. "You moved the fence again," she said. "I came to listen," Elias replied. She studied him for a long moment, then stepped inside. "Good," she said, "because the war you started is almost ready to remember your name." Marrow sat at the small table like she owned the place, not relaxed, not tense, certain. Elias poured coffee with steady hands. "You said I broke the deal," he said. "Tell me how to fix it." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she traced a finger along a burn mark in the wood, old, from before the ranch was rebuilt. "This land," she said, "was never yours alone. It was divided with blood, yours and others you chose not to count." Elias swallowed. "I protected what I could." Marrow finally looked at him. "You protected what paid you." She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the fields. "Holt thinks this is a territorial grab," she said. "He's wrong. The men moving now don't want land." "What do they want?" "Truth," she replied, "and leverage." She turned back to him. "There's a ledger," she said. "Names, routes, payments, proof of what really happened during the purge." Elias felt his stomach drop. "That ledger burned." Marrow shook her head. "You watched the wrong fire." Silence filled the room. "If you help me recover it," she continued, "I'll keep quiet again, publicly." That word mattered. For the first time, Elias felt hope creep in, a way out, a correction, a second deal. "When?" he asked. "Tomorrow night, Old Canyon Trail." She stepped past him toward the door, then paused. "One more thing," she added. "If you lie this time, I won't sell silence again." She left. Elias stood alone, convinced, just for a moment, that this could end clean. That belief would cost him more than the first deal ever did. Elias didn't sleep that night, not because he feared Marrow, but because part of him believed her, and belief out here was more dangerous than bullets. The canyon trail twisted through stone like a scar that never healed. Moonlight barely reached the bottom, swallowed by rock and shadow. Elias arrived early, rifle slung low, senses tight. Too quiet. That silence again, the kind that meant someone else was already listening. Marrow came from the east, just as promised. No horse this time, no weapon visible. "You came alone," she said. "So did you." She nodded. "Good. Fewer lies that way." They walked together down into the canyon, footsteps echoing faintly. Elias noticed fresh marks in the dirt, boot prints, careful ones. Someone trained. "You didn't tell me others were looking," he said. Marrow didn't slow. "I didn't know how many." They reached the old supply shack, half collapsed, wedged between stone walls. This was where the ledger had been hidden years ago, tucked beneath false boards when fires raged above. Elias knelt, pried the wood loose. Empty. His breath caught. "No," he muttered. "It was here." Marrow crouched beside him, eyes scanning the shadows. "Then we're late." A sound cut through the air. Metal shifting. a rifle being cocked. "Don't move," a voice called from above. Holt stepped into view on the ridge, flanked by two men, not ranchers, not settlers, soldiers without uniforms. "I told you this wasn't just land. That book, it's worth more than acreage ever was." Elias stood slowly. "You don't know what's in it." Holt smiled thinly. "I know who's named in it." The men withdrew as suddenly as they appeared. No shots fired, no threats shouted, just confirmation. The war had already changed shape. On the ride back, Marrow was silent. Finally, Elias spoke. "You said this could end." She looked at him then, really looked at him. "I said it could end cleanly," she replied, "not safely." If you're still here, take a breath and subscribe and like this video, because from here on, every truth uncovered will cost someone something. They reached the ranch near dawn. Smoke rose where the northern fence used to be. Not burning, smoldering, a warning. Elias felt the last pieces of certainty leave him. "What happens now?" he asked. Marrow dismounted. "Now," she said, "you choose who you protect when the ledger starts talking." She walked toward the house. This time, she didn't wait for him to follow. The ledger didn't need to be found to start working. By morning, the ranch was surrounded by rumors, names whispered at wells, old faces showing up where they didn't belong, men who hadn't spoken in years suddenly remembering details. Truth has a smell, and it was back in the air. Elias stood on the porch, watching riders pass without stopping, neutral faces, measuring eyes, the kind that already knew something and wanted confirmation. Marrow joined him, arms crossed. "They copied parts of it," she said quietly, "enough to scare people." "Who?" Elias asked. She didn't answer at first. "The families you thought were gone." That hit harder than any accusation. By noon, Holt returned, alone this time. No rifle, no escort. "I won't pretend we're on the same side, but there are worse men circling now. The ledger woke them." Elias stared him down. "You want protection." Holt nodded. "I want time." Marrow scoffed. "Time ran out years ago." That afternoon, Elias opened the locked chest beneath his bed. Inside, old documents, deeds, letters, and one small envelope he'd never burned. Marrow watched as he opened it. Inside was a list, not of enemies, of survivors. Names Elias had quietly redirected, families he'd warned, routes he'd changed, lives he'd saved by sacrificing others. Marrow read it without blinking. "So this is why you live, and they died." Elias felt something break, not loudly, but completely. "I told myself I chose the lesser evil," he said. Marrow folded the paper. That's what everyone tells themselves when they start counting lives. That night, shots rang out near the eastern ridge. Not random, targeted. The war had officially crossed into blood. Elias loaded his rifle, hands steady despite the weight in his chest. Marrow stood beside him. "When this ends, there won't be silence left to buy." Elias nodded. For the first time, he didn't argue. The first death wasn't announced. It didn't need to be. A rider was found near the riverbend at sunrise, throat cut clean, pockets untouched, rifle still slung across his back. Someone wanted it clear this wasn't robbery. It was judgment. By noon, every ranch within 30 miles was choosing sides. Some rode toward Holt, some toward Elias. Others packed what they could and vanished. Territory wars were predictable. This wasn't one. Marrow took control without asking. She met messengers Elias never summoned, spoke to families he hadn't seen since the purge. She remembered names, faces, children who should have been dead. "They trust you," Elias said quietly. "They remember me," she replied. "That's different." Holt came again, angrier now. "You're losing men," he snapped at Elias. "Call her off." Elias didn't answer. Marrow stepped forward instead. "You wanted leverage," she said. "Now you're learning what it costs." Holt's hand twitched near his belt. "This ends with blood." Marrow nodded. "It always did." That night, Elias realized something terrifying. The war no longer needed him. The land, the men, the memories, they were moving around him, not because of him. Marrow wasn't correcting the past, she was releasing it. "You're not trying to win," Elias said. She looked at him, eyes steady. "I'm trying to finish." A fire lit the southern ridge after midnight, then another. Signals. Not chaos, coordination. Elias felt the weight of every decision he'd ever buried rise up at once. "What happens to me when this is over?" he asked. Marrow didn't answer right away. Finally, she said, "That depends on whether you're remembered as a man who confessed or one who hid behind survival." Gunfire cracked in the distance. The war had chosen its hour. And Elias understood the truth he'd avoided for years. Redemption would cost him the only thing he'd protected: his name. The truth didn't arrive quietly. It rode in at dawn, nailed to wood and read out loud. Copies of ledger pages, partial, smudged, but real, were posted at wells, trading posts, even church doors. Names, dates, routes, payments. Not all of it. Enough. Enough to ruin men who had survived by staying useful. By mid-morning, shouting filled the valley. Families demanded answers. Old alliances shattered in public. Men who once shared meals now reached for guns with shaking hands. Elias watched from the ridge as his name was spoken again and again. Not cursed. Weighed. That hurt more. Marrow stood beside him. "You could deny it," she said. "Blame forgery. Say the war twisted records." Elias shook his head. "That would only buy time." She studied him. "And what will truth buy you?" Elias thought of the list, the survivors, the dead. "An ending," he said. The first firefight erupted near the river bend. Holt's men clashed with riders wearing no colors at all. Shots echoed sharp and fast, smoke crawling over water like a living thing. Territory lines vanished, only grudges remained. Elias rode straight into town, unarmed. Men shouted at him to stop, others told him to keep going. He dismounted in front of the trading post, climbed the steps, and turned to face them all. "I won't run, and I won't lie." The crowd went silent. "I paid for silence because I was afraid the truth would burn everything I built. But the land remembers what I tried to bury, and now so should you." Someone threw a stone. It missed. Someone else lowered their rifle. Behind him, Marrow watched, not intervening, judging. Gunfire thundered again, closer now. The war wasn't waiting for speeches. Marrow stepped forward at last. "This ends tonight, with or without forgiveness." She looked at Elias. "You ready to lose what you saved yourself for?" Elias met her gaze. Yes. Night fell fast. Not gently, like something slammed a door on the sky. Gunfire stitched the valley together in sharp bursts. Fires burned where fences once stood. Men shouted names that hadn't been spoken since the purge, not as prayers, but as accusations. The land was done pretending. Elias rode with Marrow toward the river bend where the fighting had thickened. He carried no banner, no colors, just a lantern tied low and the weight of everything he'd avoided saying. Bodies lay where negotiations should have happened. Not strangers, neighbors. They found Holt near the old cottonwood, wounded but alive, propped against the trunk like a man waiting for judgment. "You should have burned the book," Holt rasped when he saw Elias. Elias dismounted. "I tried." Holt laughed, coughing blood. That ledger was never about guilt. It was a map. Marrow closed her eyes once, just once. My family wasn't erased by chaos. They were removed because they wouldn't bend. Holt nodded weakly. They wouldn't sell silence. Shots rang out nearby. Someone screamed. Elias felt the final layer peel away inside him. "I didn't just choose who lived," he said quietly. "I helped teach men how to control the rest." Marrow looked at him then, not with anger, not with mercy, with clarity. They reached the river bend just as the last copies of the ledger were being argued over by desperate hands. Elias stepped into the firelight. "Stop," he said. Some recognized him, some didn't. It doesn't end with names on paper. It ends when someone admits what the paper was used for. He turned to Marrow. "Tell them," he said. She hesitated, not because she was afraid, because once spoken, the truth couldn't be aimed anymore. "It was never about justice," Marrow said loudly. "It was about ownership, of land, of fear, of people." Murmurs spread, then anger, then understanding. A rifle cracked, not aimed at Elias, at the ledger. Pages burned mid-air, catching fire as they fell into the river. Men shouted, some cheered, some panicked. Control slipped through everyone's fingers at once. Elias watched the flames consume the last leverage he had ever benefited from, and for the first time, he felt light enough to fall. Marrow stepped close. "This doesn't make us even." "I know," Elias replied. "It just makes it over." The gunfire slowed, not because peace arrived, but because no one knew what to fight for anymore. Morning came without celebration. No cheers, no victory. Just smoke drifting low and the sound of men counting who didn't answer when names were called. The war didn't end because someone won. It ended because no one could pretend anymore. Elias sat alone on the porch of the ranch house, rifle resting untouched beside him. The land looked the same, wide, quiet, stubborn, but it no longer felt like something that belonged to him. Marrow stood at the fence line, watching riders leave. Some nodded to her, some couldn't meet her eyes. "They won't forget this," Elias said. "They shouldn't," she replied. By noon, the flags were gone. No colors marked territory anymore. Claims would be redrawn later by courts or guns or something in between, but the old ownership, the kind built on silence, was finished. Marrow walked back toward him. "I'm leaving," she said. Elias nodded. He'd known before she spoke. "Anywhere in particular?" he asked. "Anywhere the land hasn't been taught to lie," she answered. She paused, then reached into her coat and pulled out a small folded paper. The list. The survivors. She placed it on the table between them. "You kept some people alive. That matters." Elias didn't touch it. "Not enough." "No," Marrow agreed, "but it's not nothing." She turned to go. Elias stopped her. "If I hadn't broken the deal..." She looked back, eyes steady. "If you hadn't, someone else would have. Silence like that always expires." Then she was gone, down the same road she had vanished into years ago, this time without shadows chasing her. The ranch didn't burn. That surprised Elias. Instead, it stayed, empty, quiet, stripped of meaning, a place that would outlive him, just as it had outlived the lie. That night, Elias packed lightly. He left the fences where they stood, let the land decide the rest. Some stories end with justice, some with forgiveness. This one ended with truth, and the understanding that it costs more than silence ever did. And you already know, if stories like this stay with you, subscribe and like this video.